One of the most successful entrepreneurs in America over the past 50 years is going public with his fourth and final prediction about a scenario he calls America's nightmare winter. You've probably never heard of Bill Bonner, but in addition to owning an interest in businesses all over the globe, he also owns more than 100,000 acres with massive properties in South America, Central America, the US, plus 3 large properties in Europe. Bonner says we're about to enter a very strange period in America, which could result in the most difficult times we've seen in many, many years. Bonner has made 3 similar predictions in his 50-plus year career, and each one proved to be exactly right, although he was mocked each and every time. This is why I strongly encourage you to read about Bonner's fourth and final prediction totally free today. It's all spelled out in a free report we've put together about America's nightmare winter scenario. Get the facts for yourself. Go to americasnightmarewinter.com to get your free copy of this report. Even if he's only partially right, it will dramatically affect you and your money. So again, go to americasnightmarewinter.com for this free report. Hi, this is Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to a very special edition of the Daniela Cambone Show, joined by a longtime supporter and friend of our show, Frank Giustra, in his beautiful estate here in Orvieto, Italy. Like I said, it's a very special edition and going to be a great interview. Frank, I mean, what can I say? I'm without words. I mean, the setting.
Well, thanks for coming all this way. And this is a lot more fun than having a Zoom interview.
I was going to say the folks at home might be thinking, what the heck are you guys doing in Orvieto? But, like I was saying offline, we speak a lot, quite frequently, about what's going on in the world events, global events, economic events. But you rarely give interviews. In fact, I could probably count on one hand the number of times we've done interviews. And I always say you really only give interviews when you have something of importance to say, which almost scares me because I feel like we're about, to embark on something that we don't even know what's in front of us. So that's a little bit about what I want to talk to you about. But here we are in Europe, here we are in Italy. So when we talk about change, a lot of change happening right beneath us right now. Italy's going under a government change, ushering in, a new regime that was not supportive of the euro. A little bit, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the energy crisis. I've been speaking to a lot of people here concerned as we're about to start the winter, whether they'll be able to pay the bill. So just let's start by getting your thoughts on the situation in Europe. I know it's a beautiful day and everything looks beautiful, but it's scary times for a lot of folks.
It is, and I think it's a scary time for all folks around the world, but Europe has a very particular problem, which is energy. But as far as let's start with Italy. Yeah. We've seen a new government, and it's a far-right movement that is now in power. I personally, from what I know about Italian politics, don't think that this is going to signal some movement for Italy to exit the euro. I think that was a lot of campaign talk. Mm-hmm. The Italian politics are really pro-euro. And you have to keep in mind that Italy has $2.7 trillion euros in debt, the second largest in Europe. It can't afford to leave. Right. It loves the EU perks. It can make all the campaign noises it wants, but at the end of the day, I don't think for the time being that they're going anywhere.
That's going to start dismantling of the euro.
Yeah, I see the euro in reference to the TV series The Squid Game. So in times of crisis, everybody's initial reaction is every man for himself. But then they realize that you need some teamwork to actually survive, while all the time keeping in mind that at the end of the day, you may end up killing each other.
Right. I think that's really well said. I think maybe the bigger picture, like I said, I have to agree with you. I don't see a quick exit from the euro for Italy. But the fact that they ushered out Draghi, right, Mario Draghi, who was really representative of the system, is that almost the bigger message at play, Frank, is that we'll see this kind of domino effect of people who perhaps want a change from what we've known traditionally.
Yeah, well, we've already seen Brexit. And I think what we have to keep our eye on are the populist movements, like the ones like Hungary with Orban. Those are the really dangerous positions that really endanger the euro system. But I think for the time being, I think the EU is safe for now. I think in the long run, it had structural problems from the beginning. You know, a single currency but individual fiscal policies. It's impossible to manage, and obviously you're going to have resentment between the rich countries and the poorer countries. So I think in the long run, I think the euro system might be in trouble, but not at the moment.
Not at the moment. So despite, as we're speaking, pound is suffering, the euro suffering, US dollar remains dominant. Would you say we're in a full-blown, is this a currency war? Would you define it as such?
I think it's the beginnings of a currency war, and that is I'm absolutely certain that we're heading into a global monetary system reset. And there's so much evidence. If you look at it in terms of chess, there are chess pieces moving all over the place. And although we can't see the end game, you know that the monetary system is in play. And I can give you numerous examples of the indications of where that is taking place, with the expansion of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, including other countries like Pakistan and India and Saudi Arabia, enlarging that trade bloc per se. You've got the BRICS coming together, talking about creating their own reserve currency as a basket of currencies, much like the SDRs at the IMF issues. You've got China, obviously, testing its digital currency in cross-border transactions. You got Russia talking about a golden ruble, which is a token backed by gold. You've got this world, the Moscow gold standard, which has been talked about, to counteract what they see, what the Russians see as Western manipulation of the gold price, so that it's not priced fairly. They want to create their own exchange in Moscow, and they're trying to attract members from around the world so that they can create their own gold standard outside of a system they see as manipulated. So, and there are many, many more. So I'm watching all these pieces, and I'm going, okay, it's in play. It's in play. I can't tell you what the end result is, but Putin and Xi have made it very clear they want an alternative to the US dollar. And although their reasons are more about, the fear of sanctions or the fear of sanctions, the rest of the world is going, hey, this is pretty cool, because they've been held hostage for so long by the US dollar supremacy. What's it done? It has gone from beggar thy neighbor policies to almost bankrupt thy neighbor. Right? You've got the US dollar right now that's going through the roof. It's up 20%. So what's that doing to the rest of the world? A lot of emerging market sovereign debt is priced in US dollars. How are they going to service that debt? IMF bailouts are at a record high right now. Everybody's going, yeah, we wouldn't mind an alternative currency to the US dollar. And for the global south, those that are not in conflict with each other, like the West, Russia-China Act, for the global south, the Indias, the Brazils, the rest, they would love to have a separate alternative trading currency where they can choose to trade with both. They can trade with the US dollar or trade with that, whatever that thing ends up looking like. And that, when it happens, and it will happen in some way, and I doubt it's going to be by consensus. It's going to happen. It's going to be forced upon the US dollar, and then things will change, and the US dollar will lose its status as the supreme dominant currency.
So there's a lot to unpack right there. And like I said, and many viewers have pointed out, your interviews have often been prophetic in nature. So the counter argument to that, right, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is that, well, the US will never allow that to happen, that they have so much power and they see all of this happening, but it's never going to happen. What would you say to those folks?
How are they going to stop it when 80% of the world's population wants a change? It's basically the US and the West, so it's Europe and Japan in one camp that would like, well, I can only speak for the US. The US would like the status quo to remain. That's absolutely certain. And they will fight it. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that this is going to be a nasty fight when it comes down to it. But how are they going to stop it when the rest of the world is stacking up in gold reserves? And they've been doing it for the last 12 years. Every central bank in the world outside of the West is piling on their gold reserves. What do you think they're doing that for?
And that's a separate discussion. I mean, I feel like we don't speak enough about that, about how central banks are, in a sense, quietly buying gold. But does that concern you at all about the U.S. not being the reserve currency of the world? Does that?
Well, it concerns me only from the point of view that I think it may usher in very dangerous times.
Right.
Because it's seldom that global power shifts without conflict. You know, if you look back through history, it's very seldom that there's a power shift from a global leader in finance, commerce, military to another without some form of deadly conflict. And that's the part that worries me.
Would you say it was the sanctions imposed on Russia that fast-tracked this path to the bifurcation of the currency system? Or was it already in play? Was it already happening years ago?
It was already in play because of the China-U.S. relations. That was already in play. China was looking and starting to test ideas as to how to shift out of the U.S. dollar system to de-dollarize. And obviously, they're doing their own thing with gold, which we can talk about. But definitely the Russian sanctions on their foreign exchange reserves and exclusion from the SWIFT system just put it all into...
But this is where I say the U.S., right, must have been aware of that. Like, if we impose these sanctions, we risk, other folks saying, hey, maybe we should get off the U.S. dollar, looking for alternatives. Were they not thinking?
I don't think they were looking that far ahead. I think they were looking at it just through tunnel vision as to the Russia-West conflict over the Ukraine. I don't think they thought it through properly, and I think they maybe miscalculated how much the rest of the world is really ready for a change. Because so not only is the U.S. impoverishing the developing world that have to pay their debts and service their debts in very overpriced U.S. dollars, but the U.S. is also exporting its inflation. By having a much stronger currencies, it makes the imports of all these countries much more expensive. And to the point where the UN the other day begged the Fed to stop raising rates. And, obviously the Fed is focused on salvaging their very poor reputation of managing the monetary systems this far. So I think that the world in general is very ready for this. And I think it's going to be hard for the U.S. to stop 80% of the world's population from doing what they need to do.
From what I'm hearing from what you're saying, you mentioned the word gold and this new system in tandem. Let's talk a little bit about what role you feel gold will play in this new system. And to challenge that, I would say, what about digital currencies? There's so much talk about how if there was a new reserve currency, it would be digital in some form. So let's start with gold.
Okay, so Russia, it's obvious what they've done. They, pre the invasion of Ukraine, they de-dollarized, they sold most of their dollars, and now are the world's fifth largest gold holder, okay? So they were prepared for this. They thought ahead. China, they were very transparent about it, so you could see what Russia was doing. China's a whole, and I think China's the key, not Russia. China's a whole different ball of wax. If you know about the Chinese gold reporting system over the last 20 years, it's not transparent by any means. They, several times in the last 20 years, they've stopped reporting, and then they come out, and when they report, gold reserves go much higher. The last time they did that was 2019.
That's right.
And they published that they had 1,950 tons of gold. There's no way on earth that is possible.
You don't believe the numbers.
Not even close. Think about it this way. China is the world's largest gold producer, 15% of world gold production, and they don't allow the export of mined gold. They're the world's largest importer of gold. They've mined 7,000 tons in the last 15 years. We know what they've mined. We don't know, because it's very difficult to gauge how much they've imported. I am absolutely certain the reason they stopped reporting is because I know as a former trader, if you're trying to accumulate something, the last thing you want to do is show your hand, because you're going to drive the price up. So they're doing it quietly, and I think that now that the cat's out of the bag, that everybody's talking about a monetary reset, I think that the next time they declare, whenever that may be, could be a few years from now, it'll be as part of a new monetary strategy by China.
So let me ask you this. We all know they rolled out a test of their, central bank digital currency. Why was not phase one done with gold? You feel they're saving this? They're going to...
Yeah, I think they're accumulating gold. And I think I wouldn't be surprised. And again, I'm just speculating, but I'm just looking at the numbers of how much gold China is accumulating over the years. It's massive. Since 1995, 46,000 tons have moved from the west to the east. And I think most of that is China. And I think that, again, they, in their minds, need to have a certain amount of gold. Keep in mind the U.S. has 8,100 tons.
Right.
And if gold is going to be part of the new monetary system, it's got to be something that is that they can prove that they can back the currency, whether it's to the tune of 20% or 40% gold backing with the gold that they own.
Okay, so folks might bring up the U.S. gold standard and say, well, Frank, they had stopped the U.S. gold standard. Some would argue it didn't work. Some would say it was working, but they chose to stop it. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, did it work?
Well, it was working better than what happened after 1971. I mean, look what's happened. The dollar since 1971 has lost 95% of its purchasing value. Okay, basically, when they went off the gold standard in 71, they let the dollar float freely. And first of all, you had 10 years of inflation, and that if you held only dollars in your checking account from 1971, it'd be worthless. The purchasing power, it just isn't there.
And, another counter argument would be like, well, why would they look to gold? Gold is, something of the past, Frank. The world it would be a digital currency, whatever people are rolling out, whatever the countries choose to do next. Why not that for you?
Because I think there's been so much faith lost in fiat currencies that if someone were to launch something new, to get the initial credibility, you need to have hard asset backing. I don't know if you saw that Credit Suisse report talking about Bretton Woods 3. Mm-hmm. Very good report. I don't agree with all of it because what Credit Suisse was saying is that the world is heading towards a currency system backed by commodities in general, right, which I think is going to be too hard to manage or too volatile. The shipping and storage is going to be very difficult to calculate, whatever. Gold, on the other hand, is owned almost universally by all the central banks already. It is viewed as money. It is money.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the new super currency China would be victorious, and it would be some sort of central bank currency. I don't want to say digital, backed by gold.
That's what I believe. Otherwise, why are they buying all this gold and not disclosing it?
So let me ask you an explosive question now. Central banks have been, as we know, hoarding gold, right? Why has the price of gold been depressed given the landscape we're in? Is there a correlation there?
I think there is, but I think it's not being spelled out in what actually is happening. People, I've talked about gold being managed in the past, or someone is directing traffic. But I think if you look at the situation closely, it's really a system of players that for a combined mutual and individual interest, like the fact that gold stays suppressed, and that is policymakers, the Western banks. And why do they do this? The IMF, why do they do this? Because everybody is profiting greatly by the status quo, where the dollar is the supreme currency and where the West controls the international credit markets. And I think if you look at it, it's not a conspiracy, so you'll never find a smoking gun, because it's not a conspiracy. It's just loosely aligned players with mutual interest. And so I kind of refer to it as the Al-Qaeda of the financial world. Not that I want to compare the financial world to a terrorist group, but it's not a top-down command structure. It's a number of people that have a belief system that is keeping them at the top of the game. And I think U.S. dollar supremacy and control of the US international credit markets allows a whole group of players that would love to see gold stay where it is. Because if it starts to move up sharply, it throws a question into the whole system. And so when I talk about manipulation, it's certainly happening at the LMBA level. And we've seen numerous lawsuits where they get fined for, JP Morgan, $1 billion fine for spoofing the markets. But, that's nothing in terms of the amount of wealth that they've created over the decades by being the supreme currency.
So let me ask you this. At one point, because you've spoken about how gold should be much higher. You've spoken about $10,000, $20,000 gold.
I never said that. You've tried to pin me down.
You've spoken about higher gold.
I said a lot higher.
A lot higher. So at one point, does the system break and the true price of gold come out?
Well, I think when and if there's a new global monetary system, which I believe will have some gold backing, and I can walk you through how those numbers would work, and you get that Moscow gold standard in place, so that you take away the trading power from the West and it moves east to Russia and China, where it already exists, then I think the lid will come off the gold price.
Because I was going to say, investors might say, well, why would I invest in gold if there is, I don't want to use the word manipulation, but there is this kind of common interest to keep it suppressed.
I think, one, you would hold it because it is a store of value. And if you watch the markets and the bond market, these equity markets, the crypto world come crashing down, gold's done okay. I mean, sure, it hasn't gone up, but it's done its job. It's maintained its store of value. But then, as additional insurance, if I'm right, and I think the signs are everywhere that we're heading towards a different monetary system, bifurcated or multiple currencies, then you want to own something that's going to have to be revalued. And I can walk you through the numbers, how that revaluation would work.
I want to say this because the folks at home may say, Frank, it sounds like you're talking about a great reset, which, just a few years ago were conspiracy theories. I mean, are you talking about, is this the great reset?
I think you're seeing the beginnings of it. There's no doubt in my mind we're heading towards a reset. I just don't know what it looks like at the end of the day. I just watch all of the indicators, like the accumulation of gold. And you think about, since 2010, all the central banks around the world have been buying gold, right? Every year, all of the non-Western countries. Right. Brazil was late to the game. In 2020, they came in 2021, and they doubled their reserves in just 1 year. They went from 60 tons to 120 tons. So I think everybody is preparing, setting the stage.
I want to zone in on the U.S., but first, you mentioned the new Moscow gold standard, which would challenge basically the LBMA. How pivotal is that for you? Is that something we should really be focusing on? Is it a non-event? How important is it?
I think you have to view it as a piece of a bigger puzzle. It's an important piece, but to me, it's a lesser important piece than what is happening in terms of all of these conversations by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or the BRICS, China, Russia, the rest of the world, clamoring for something different. Okay, so it's just one piece of a mosaic that I see kind of unfolding in front of my eyes.
I want to talk about the U.S. because I know you've written in depth about how the Biden administration is looking at regulating cryptocurrencies, and it looks like it's happening faster than many people thought. I know, speaking with you, you've said they will not want a competing currency, and they'll do everything to stop Bitcoin. I've spoken to other experts on the flip side who will say the U.S. will not want to be last in this race. If Bitcoin is the future, they're not going to want to ban it. They're going to want to be ahead of it. I want to really get your thoughts here.
Yeah, I think you have to separate what the U.S. really wants is to be ahead of the game on blockchain, not Bitcoin particular, or some form of digital system that they can eventually take over. And that's, they're going to create their own central bank digital currency like everybody else in the world. And they're not going to want competition. I see Bitcoin as an anti-sovereign fiat play. And if I'm right about a monetary reset where everybody's going to something else that incorporates digital currencies in that whatever they create, the last thing they're going to want is the competition from Bitcoin. And as I said a year and a half ago during our debate with Michael Saylor, eventually they will want to take Bitcoin out. I think there's too much risk there.
And I want to get back to the debate in a second and bring it up. But on the topic of privacy, right? Is there going to be a way, if everyone's ushering in a digital currency, we've spoken about the dangers and what this will mean for our privacy, will there ever be a way to be outside of the system, or this is it?
The only thing that I can think of, and again, I don't have a crystal ball, okay, here, I'm just speculating, but the only thing I can think of is have some physical gold, okay? I think everybody, and I mean everybody, should own some physical gold. That means according to your wealth, okay, in relationship to your wealth. Even if you own one coin, it's $1,700 a coin. Recently I saw that there was a discovery in the UK. They were building a house and they found a pot of gold that was 250 years old. Today's gold has the same purchasing power as that gold had back then. It's all relative. And in the meantime, paper currencies have come and gone, been destroyed, been inflated away. Own some gold is all I can say. I don't have any other answer, because they can't attack your coin of gold. They can certainly, if they wanted to, attack anything that's out there in the digital world.
Is that a scary future for you? I mean, you have kids. Are you thinking, and I have young kids, and I'm thinking, like, is this, this is the world we're going to grow up in? Zero privacy. I mean, does this keep you up at night?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we're heading to a 1984 Orwellian world. I really do. I'm not sure what one can do to stop it if everybody does it. America's going to do it. China's done it already. I don't know what world we're going to do it. I don't like it.
Do you talk about it with your kids?
Not in detail, but certainly, I'm the chairman of an organization that is trying to prevent conflict around the world. And so I know a lot about the geopolitical conflicts, and I've studied history, and I see patterns that emerge over and over again. And I tell my children that we're going through a change and that they have to be prepared to see some difficult times ahead. And, and I coach them, where they should live. And, obviously they're going to do what they're going to do.
Where should we live? I want to know. Tell me. Here.
Canada.
Oh, I'm going to stay right here. You're not getting rid of me.
The weather's nicer here.
Yeah. You mentioned the debate. As we know, it's made history. It's the greatest debate ever on Bitcoin versus gold. We're 1.5 years already.
Yeah.
Looking back, right, there was a lot of big statements made during that debate. One thing I want to bring up, because I never got a chance to ask you. This is the first time you've come back on my show since the debate, I think. The gold sector gets a lot of heat. One thing we often hear is they don't do a good job of marketing gold. Look at what Bitcoin's done. And one thing Michael Saylor brought up during the debate is, how come the miners don't even hold the product themselves on their balance sheet? Barrick doesn't hold gold on their balance sheet. Should they? Was that a fair comment he made?
I think it's only fair from the point of view that they've done a lousy job of marketing up until now. And what they've just, the World Gold Council just announced a couple of weeks ago that they're creating, and I know it's been in the works for about a year now, a token backed by gold, a digital token backed by gold that's accessible, easy accessible, like Bitcoin is. It's fungible, and it's basically modernizing the way that people can invest in gold. So that's a really great improvement from having done not a great marketing job in the past. But I think to answer the question directly about gold mining companies, I know that about 20-something years ago, a gold mining company in Canada tried that. They said, well, we're not going to, we're gold. The founder, Rob McEwen, was a gold bug, and he really believed in gold. He said, no, we're going to keep our gold, and we're not going to sell it for dollars, whatever. The problem is you're a publicly traded company that's trying to attract institutional investors, and the institutional investors didn't like that idea. They wanted to see earnings. They wanted to be able to project cash flows so they could do their multiples. So as great as his motivation was, and in a way he was right, because he's saying this when gold was $250, $300 an ounce, he would have lost a lot of it. It's just not the world of public companies trade in.
And, obviously, if we look at the price, you look at the price of Bitcoin now. When we did the debate, we were around the 60,000. We're now around the 20,000 mark. You're just smiling.
Well, God, again, and I've said this so many times, it didn't take a PhD in math to be able to see that Bitcoin was perfectly correlated with speculation stocks, the NASDAQ, all this crazy stuff. And it was a bubble. Anybody could see it was a bubble. Any person who had been around long enough could see it was a bubble.
I know what was fueling you, what was angering you, is the talk of, mortgage your house, sell everything.
It was the worst advice And, there were several players out there, not just Michael Saylor, but others that were saying, sell everything, put everything to Bitcoin. And I thought that was the most irresponsible and stupid thing that people could say. And that's the reason I asked you for the debate. I was angry that he was getting away with it.
I know we're going to take a walk amongst these beautiful grounds of yours, but I need to get your thoughts a little bit, on the Fed. I know you've been very, very critical. You've come out saying you feel the inflation numbers are actually much higher. They're actually suppressing the inflation numbers they're giving us.
Yeah.
Just thoughts on where you think they're headed. How much longer can they tighten for?
I think the pivot is around the corner.
Really?
I've said all along. I said it in 2009,
Yeah.
and I said it for the last 15 or so years. They cannot raise rates. It's mathematically impossible. They cannot unwind the balance sheet. It's mathematically impossible. And they've convinced the marketplace time and time again that they would raise rates. They tried it in 2016. They failed. They've had so much heat now for being wrong. And the Fed's been wrong for 20 years. But they've had so much heat that they're now trying to improve their image by talking tough. And they're trying to talk inflation down by saying, we're going to keep raising rates to 4.5%, blah, blah. They'll never get there. At 4%, the U.S. government debt is $30 trillion. That would be $1.2 trillion in interest costs. The math doesn't make any sense. You got $300 trillion worth of debt around the world, which has doubled in 10 years. How are you going to implode the entire system if you raise interest rates? So I think they're going to find an excuse. And I think the excuse is being given to them. They're exporting their inflation around the world. Countries are screaming. They're looking for IMF bailouts. Something's going to break. In America alone, it now takes 50% of the average household income to pay a mortgage. Credit card debt is at its all-time highs. They're going to break. Something's going to break.
If the U.S. loses its reserve currency status, can it still remain the superpower, or will it also eventually?
I think it's a long way off. It's not like Rome with the barbarians at the gate. I think it's got 700 military bases around the world. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I'm afraid that it finds an excuse for military action to protect its its supreme status, and that's the only thing that worries me.
Here we are in your beautiful estate, where you share your other passion, which is olive oil. You have Domenica Fiore, #1 olive oil in the world. How did you decide to? You're obviously very successful, and how do you decide where you want to, or what you want to be involved in? Why did you choose olive oil?
Passion. It's just passion. Listen, I love food. And I know you do too. So we're Italian by heritage, so we love food. And I've been cooking my entire adult life. My friends love to cook. I discovered the idea of olive oil by just visiting this location. It's another house, but for many, many years, and tasting the olive oil that came from this region, it just blew my mind. And so being curious, I rallied a bunch of good friends around me, and we said, let's go in the olive oil business. This is great. And not only that, but let's make the best one in the world. And it sounded a little bit bold at the time, but you know what? Our olive oil continuously wins #1 in the world over and over, all the international contests. It is, in my opinion, the best in the world. And, I named it after my mother.
Beautiful.
And for her, I'm proud, and I'm sure she was very proud because she knew, she saw it all happening before she passed away.
Well, I wanted to ask you that because, offline we were speaking how you came from very humble beginnings and how gold perhaps would have saved your family, you were saying, because they had fled Argentina, so during hyperinflation.
Yeah, so I grew up, I grew up in Argentina until I was 9 years old. My whole family did. And my father had invested in some businesses down there. He was hoping to, he was a miner. He was a driller and a blaster, worked underground, not a great life for him. He did that for so many years. So he wanted to get out of that. And so the Argentinian thing, that time Argentina was in pretty solid shape. It was one of the wealthiest countries in the world in the 60s. And then he saw the change start. He saw the Peronist movement taking shape and that the country was falling apart. And he decided to move us back to Canada. And then he tried to get his money out. He tried to, and he got into some litigation with some of his partners. And so he didn't get his money out in time. By the time he received his payment, maybe 5 years later, it was worth zero. Hyperinflation had taken hold in Argentina, through hyperinflation and made the currency worth. He lost everything he worked for over hyperinflation, and he didn't have any gold. So,
and you're saying gold would have saved the firm?
Absolutely, because gold, always keeps its value over any paper currency.
And this is perhaps a bigger question for another interview, but all this said, can America's economy be saved at this point?
No, I wrote an article recently. It was titled "How to Fix a Broken American: 4 Easy Steps That Will Never Happen." That was basically my idea of the article, and basically it was a diagnosis of without a realistic cure. And I pointed to 4 things that are almost unique to America and not elsewhere in the world. One is money in politics. Since the introduction, since Citizens United, the Supreme Court case, the creation of super PACs, you can buy any politician you want because now you can spend as much money buying politicians. And it's very reminiscent of the late Roman Republic when senators were being bought.
But it would all be disclosed with a digital currency.
Well, no, but it's not about disclosure. They can do it openly. They're just, super PACs have raised about $3 billion. You know that in the last election, $14.5 billion was spent on a U.S. election. That is ridiculous. I mean, you can obviously, if you're rich and powerful and you have an interest that you want to protect, whether you're the pharmaceutical industry that spent almost $500 million last year on lobbying, or the defense industry, which spent $120 million, or the oil industry, all of that money, I mean, they spent a total of $4 billion on lobbying. They have 12,000 lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and they spent $4 billion last year in lobbying efforts. It buys a lot more than a 3-martini lunch. It just buys your influence to be able to control and protect your interests, which is usually not always in the best interest of the public. So that was number one, was take money out of politics, but it will never happen. 2 was shorten the election cycle. You have this ever-ending election cycle every 2 years with campaigning that starts 200-300 days in advance. It's a continuous election cycle that you never see anywhere in the world. And as anybody knows from politics, you say what you need to say to get elected, but then you have to govern. And there's no chance to govern because they're always campaigning. You compare the election cycles in the U.S. to, say, Canada or Mexico, where they last 3 months. But in the U.S., it's like all the time, and you can't govern when you're campaigning. So shorten the election cycle somehow. And again, I'll say none of these things are going to happen. A flat tax. Just the biggest corporations, the biggest Fortune 500 companies pay 0 income tax. Okay, and a lot of them get credits so that they have a negative tax rate. And no matter what you do to change the tax legislation, they can afford very expensive lawyers and accountants that always find a loophole, and I can show you the evidence. You can go to my article and read it, that shows you the evidence of how they've done that over the years. If you had a flat tax, 15%, no deductions, and you put a bottom on it so the poorest don't pay any tax. There's a certain level at which you start paying tax. You don't disadvantage the poor. 4, I think you have to do something about the Fed. The Fed is, to me, a government-backed cartel of bankers that have no real interest in the real economy, and they're either extremely incompetent or they're complicit. And the reason I think that they're complicit is because they only criticize Fed actions after they retire. Greenspan, Bernanke, all these guys, while they're in power, they toe the line. And to me, it's a cozy relationship. And I don't think I think they've ruined the American dollar. I think they've ruined the American economy. They printed all this money unnecessarily. They'll never be able to
But
unwind
they're supposed to be the smartest economists.
They're not.
Okay, but
maybe they are. But if they're really smart, they're incompetent. They're
Frank
complicit.
Giustra talking about end the Fed?
I don't know. I don't have the answer of what to do. And I said in my article, I'm not sure what the answer is, but I know that the current system's not working, and it's not doing justice to the American people.
Was there any Fed chair you liked?
Volcker. I mean,
but he took a tough road.
He took a tough road. But he did it when there was very little debt in the system and they could afford to take a road. Sure, they took some economic pain for a couple of years, created a recession. But if Powell tried to do what Volcker did, he would implode the entire planet. You can't do it. There's too much debt.
And the system just can't I don't think it can sustain the tightening cycle.
No, it won't. And I've said it all along. I thought that the cap was going to be 3%.
Right.
They might get it to 3.5, 4, but they can't go past 4. There are many reasons why they can't do it.
Well, if they revert back to QE, let's say, what happens to inflation?
I think we're going to live in a stagflationary world for a while, and there's nothing they can do. They're stuck. They've been in a box, and I've told you this years ago.
I can't see the way out.
There's no way out. They made the mistake a long, long time ago. The only thing that's going to change things now is a reset of the entire global system.
Right.
That's the only way out.
It makes sense.
And there will be pain that comes
sense.
with it, but there's no other answer. There's no way to unwind this problem. So I think that the Fed created the problem in the first place, and now they're in danger of putting everybody over the cliff because they want to talk tough. But I think they're just basically exporting their inflation and trying to talk inflation down as opposed to actually tackling it in any meaningful way with really aggressive rate hikes. So that's the Fed.
And that's why I don't want to keep going back to cryptocurrencies, but I'm surprised that or blockchain does it appeal to you in the sense that it challenges the current status quo? In a sense, it challenges the system.
Yes, in an alternative world where we didn't live in reality, and I mean the reality of the kind of geopolitical world we live in, with the competition that takes place and the power and the fight for power,
right,
and market share and whatever. In this world, they won't let something that they can't control take over the system. I always said, I think blockchain and even the cryptocurrencies were a great utopian vision that in a real world will never work in the long run. They won't let it happen.
I want to talk a little bit about life with you. I know we're going to walk through your beautiful grounds here. We're at your estate where you press Domenica Fiore olive oil, one of the greatest olive oils in the world. We're going to taste some, I hope.
Absolutely.
It's named after your mom, right? And I know how important your parents are to you. What would she say about all your success and this?
My mother was never impressed with money. She didn't care. She could care less how much wealth I created and my successes, whatever. She would just nod and say, eat more pasta and make sure you take care of your family, be happy. I want you to. She always said right to the end of her life, be happy. I want you guys to be happy. That's all she cared about. My father was a tough guy. And he never wanted me to go into this business in the first place. He thought, he wanted to be a lawyer, doctor, engineer, the typical Italian thing. And I disappointed him. And he was very disappointed because he always thought I was going to go broke, that I was living beyond my means and all these things.
Wow.
And that I didn't belong in this world. And it was only once, and it was during a Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah.
And my brother, and he was going on and on about how successful my sister was as a lawyer, and that she was the only success story in the family. Yep. And my brother, to my surprise, came to my defense and goes, "What about Frank? Look at Frank." And my dad, when he's eating his food, he goes, "Yeah, I guess he did okay."
Wow.
That was it. That was the compliment I got. So, really, it was, they lived in a different time. They went through a very hard life, and,
But secretly, he was proud.
I know. Yeah. I know he was proud. He just was too tough to show it.
I would just love to ask you, like I said, you have tremendous success that people could only dream of, Is there anything, looking back, would you have done differently? I mean, does Frank Giustra have any regrets about anything?
No, and I'll tell you why. Here's my philosophy.
Yeah.
Everything that I did, every mistake I made, every road I took led me to this moment in time. And I'm at peace because my life is philanthropy, as you know. Business is the fun part of it, but my real love is my philanthropic work around the world. I'm at peace and I'm happy. So why would I have regrets? Every mistake I made brought me here. I don't believe in regrets because obviously my path took me here, and I'm cool with it.
And I think that's a common denominator of people at your level of success is that, they don't live in the past, right?
No.
Yeah. Well,
and I made some doozy mistakes. Don't get me wrong. I made some really dumb mistakes that could have put me under. But that's life.
So let me just ask you this: what do you tell your kids? Like, your parents wanted you to be a doctor, lawyer. What do you tell them?
The very opposite. because both of them, well, at least my son approached me once and was worried about having to live up to my expectations.
Yeah, I could see that.
And I said, hey, relax, dude.
Yeah.
I'd be disappointed if you followed in my footsteps. I really would. I need you to find your own dream. And whatever you choose, make sure you're passionate about it. And if you're passionate about it, you'll be happy. And if you're happy, I'm happy. Do whatever it is you want. I'll support your dreams. But you got to do it on your own and blaze your own trail.
So let's get to a part I'm really looking forward to. I get to walk the grounds.
Yep.
And you know I'm a foodie. I get to try this incredible olive oil. So shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we are about to go in the factory where the magic happens.
Yep.
And tell us a little bit about what's happening that's so special tonight.
We're doing a night harvest,
Okay.
which I think we're the only ones in the industry to do it. So where we harvest the oil at nighttime when it's less hot, because we harvest very early, and then we keep it under a certain cold press number that makes it really cold pressed and early.
And it's already going.
It's already going. So you've got the olives are being sorted here. They get washed and cleaned, all the leaves, all the twigs, and then I'll show you inside what happens. Cesare, how you doing, man? How are you?
I'm good. Hi, how are you?
Look at that.
Wow.
It's liquid gold. I'll make it liquid gold this time. It's fantastic. And wait till you taste it.
I cannot wait. I've been waiting to taste it.
Let's
Go for
taste it.
testing. Domenica Fiore oil is an incredible product. First things, well, we start from the land. We have our own trees. We're looking after all year to try to boosting the most possibility of the tree, and we collecting the fruit in our mill. We are pressing right away.
Wow.
We are generally squeeze the fruit in less than 4 hours, directly from the land to the mill. And this is our Novello 2022.
Which we're harvesting at the moment, the Novello.
We're going to do the night harvest, right? That's what we're experiencing tonight. What makes it so unique?
Yeah, the night harvest is very unique. We have the benefit of using a low temperature in the night, and the oil is coming out much more perfect. And we have less oxidation, while during the night the temperature is going below 20 degrees, and the fruit are more fresh.
So, we know the word extra virgin olive oil. Is this extra virgin?
Should
How would you?
Ultra virgin.
Ultra. and just, I wish the folks at home could. The perfume, talk to me a little bit about what
the aroma, no, the best things you can keep the glass, the cup in your hand to warm it up a little bit to get much more deep aroma. Obviously the notes coming out super fresh, almost feel like eucalyptus mint,
that's right.
The fragrance
smell the mint.
is very, very intense.
I can try some now.
Sure.
I feel like I'm drinking something the Roman gods would be drinking, so I feel this is a privilege. Wow.
Wait for the afterburn.
There it is.
There's the afterburn.
Wow.
Divine.
It's very peppery.
Well, I want to thank you both for having me here for this really special tour. I learned a lot, definitely, and may I cheers to your success. Continued blessings.
Thank you so much.
Salute.
Salute.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Frank, I want to thank you again for having me here. It's not just been a lesson on olive oil, but really on life. And, if I may just bring it back to our conversation earlier, with the picture you've depicted, that's quite ugly of what's going on in the world. And yet here we are in paradise. What are just some final thoughts from you?
Again, when you're standing here, it helps you put it all in perspective.
Right.
You think about this land 1 million years ago was covered by ocean, and it's created a very rich soil that's nourished countless civilizations for thousands of years. The Etruscans came here about 1000 BC. They were here for a while. Then the Romans came, and then the Romans left, almost 1,000 years later. You had the papal states and the city-states, and then the Italian kingdom again, a fascist regime, 70 governments since World War II. But guess what? The land remains. It's impervious to who comes and goes. It's indifferent to the rise and fall of empires. It's here to nourish whoever lives on this land. And I always think, we're just passing through. This is a moment in time, in eternity, and that's why you have to enjoy what you have. And the world's going to do what it's going to do. You can't control those things. And this just reminds me of the beauty of living.
And it reminds us that all empires come and go.
And that is true, sadly, but that's history and that's what happens.
And so maybe the final takeaway, Frank, is maybe we should just learn to be more like the land.
Exactly. A simpler life.
A simpler life.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.